Subject today, Who Owns Your Children, and subtitled The Dangers of Government as Parent, is really an age-old battle. It's been going on in this country in a very heated fashion for about 100 years. It involves two radically opposing views of parenting and education, and they are at war and have been at war for some time in America. The gradual results of this over time have resulted in the destruction of not only education, but along with it our liberties, our constitutional government, and our American society in many, many respects. So we're going to talk about that. First of all, I'm going to just sort of preface this by saying, well, who's Alan Scholl? Why would you want to listen to me? Well, successive generations of Americans, just like me, 6 or 7 generations at least, have witnessed the gradual conversion of what used to be education into an indoctrination system. Many people are awakening to this in varying degrees. Some have discovered a lot of alarming evidence over the years of something that is very sinister when you get close to it. Unfortunately, though, most Americans have no idea what is happening to them, their children, or their grandchildren. As we go along, I'll point out a few things. I'm not a newcomer to alternative education. In 1982, our oldest daughter attended a Fresno, California public school. That experience led to our home educating 7 children. Almost 29 years now, we've been homeschooling. So far, this has produced 5 high school homeschool graduates, and we have 2 13 and 16-year-olds that are in the Freedom Project now, and they are homeschooling as well through Freedom Project. We have 3 older grandchildren now who, 3 older children who have 7 grandchildren now, and all 7 of them are homeschooled. So we've taken it pretty seriously as a family, and my children appreciate what we've done. Now, I delivered about 120 Children of the State speeches across the country in 2000 and 2001. I spoke to thousands of people. I appeared on radio, television, and the truth that I uncovered in the process of putting that talk together has created a fire in me for this topic that is probably older than a lot of the people in the room. Sadly, the effects of what I was talking about then, 14 years ago, are much worse, and it's accelerating much more rapidly today. You see, my biggest credential is I am simply a recovering public school student. Primarily, most of us are recovering public school students. We walk around with the marination that we received in that system. My recovery simply started a long, long time ago, and it's been a dedicated, conscientious effort. Strangely, most adults I talk to as evidence of this malady say 2 things. The first thing they say when we have a discussion about education is, yes, education in this country is in a shambles. It's terrible. We've got problems in our government schools and in education across America. They're failing, they're flawed, they're filled with problems, the environment's not good. And then almost immediately in the same conversation, they will also say, but my school, the one I attended, the one my kids go to, the one my grandkids go to, it's fine. You think about that for a minute. It's part of a frog in the water influence, and I hope when we're done here today, you'll ask yourself if you see this influence in your own children or grandchildren, or even in yourselves. Our second president, John Adams, said, "Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence." So what I'm going to do today in the spirit of John Adams is I'm going to bring out facts, quotes, comparisons, and evidence. We're going to start with basically 6 different areas here, and we're going to go through each one very briefly. Where we came from. And in terms of where we came from, we're going to get into some detail about that. Where we're going, who has done this, why is it happening to us, how it is happening, and finally what we can do. We're going to start with where we came from. And where we came from is the America that our founders built, the original philosophy that built America, its society, its prosperity, and it served us so well for 250 years, and it still continues to serve us in many respects. Although unfortunately today that system is dying, and increasingly rapidly dying. It's the methodology that made America great economically. It helped us to enjoy our liberty and preserve our freedom of worship and conscience. The philosophy is the original biblical and American view of parenting. Children and adults in this system are seen as sovereign individuals. They're God's creations, made in His image. It's a biblical worldview and methodology, even though there were many different denominations involved in the founding of our country and in the building of our country. But you cannot, in my opinion, separate education and that foundation without dire consequences. Education in early America was a fairly family affair. It was parentally designed, chosen, administered, and delivered. Even if it was outside the home, it was arranged by parents, paid for by parents, and monitored by parents. Not only just the teaching, but the curriculum itself. It's traditional in our country to have this system. Many today who have faith consider themselves stewards of children, not owners of children. In my opening title here, I talked about who owns the children. In my view, it's God. I'm a steward. We're not owners. We're stewards for a higher authority. And that was the American norm and the opinion of most parents in this country for many, many years. Knowledge has one true source, God and Scriptures. If you believe otherwise, I would contend right now that you're a victim perhaps of your own educational experience. History, language, logic, geography, science, all have foundations in creation and Scripture. Name a subject. Without a reference including God, they are from the outset built on false science, false philosophy, false belief, and false foundations. Coincidentally, this is the one source that is not allowed in the government public school system. From 1600 to about 1880, virtually every textbook used in this American country of ours quoted, referenced, or directly cited Scriptures. Many texts still did, even late into the 20th century. Right here in my hand is the Bible study course for Dallas high schools, published and distributed in April 1946. This is my grandmother's civil studies textbook, 1890. It has a whole chapter on the evils of an unbacked currency. We hear a lot today, America's not a Christian nation, but wait and hear a little bit more before you join that clamor. I hear it so much, supported by government, supported by media, entertainment, the public education establishment especially. But go out and find a little video out on the web called Stoplight, A Walk for the President. It's put out by Citizen Link. It's just a couple of minutes long. It may help start your own recovery as a recovering public school student. Not coincidentally, the same sources I accuse of the majority of our problems in education in America and many of the related problems are the very same ones who are promoting very heavily the denial of our heritage. I think it's absurd. Here's Noah Webster, the producer of the first real dictionary in this country, and he said the Bible is the chief moral cause of all that's good and the best book for regulating the concerns of men. The principles of genuine liberty and of the wise laws and administrations are to be drawn from the Bible and sustained by its authority. He didn't stop there. He said, the man, therefore, who weakens or destroys the divine authority of that book may be accessory to all the public disorders which society is doomed to suffer. And then he said there's only two powers, really two, sufficient to control men and secure the rights of individuals, the combined force of law and religion. That is what we're outlining in our government school system. The examples are very numerous. This is Pimio's primary grammar. This contains, from the 1850s, constant references to God, morality, Scripture, the Constitution, and the Republic that we live in. Here is Webster's 1828 dictionary, my favorite. I highly recommend it. It is steeped and oriented in Christian principles and foundations. Back to John Adams. He warned us, did he not, that our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate for the government of any other? If you haven't been taught in those precepts, how on earth can you retain your liberties under a constitutional republic? Today, in government schools, Bible, prayer, Christian thought, and practice are all banned or denigrated. For 250 years, we used books like these. McGuffey's Readers, Webster's Blueback Speller. By the way, Webster sold over 1 million copies a year for over 100 years. And here's the first lesson in the book. It's a moral catechism. It says, it's a rule for moral conduct. It says, God's word contained in the Bible has furnished all necessary rules to direct our conduct. Very first lesson. We were warned about this. We were warned by educators in those days. Charles Hodge, professor, theologian at Princeton Seminary, which is how that organization got its start, told us in 1856, he said, "No man is molested for his religion or his want of religion. No man is required to profess any form of faith or join any religious association. More than this cannot reasonably be demanded. More, however, is demanded. The infidel demands that the government should be conducted on the principle Christianity is false. The atheist demands that it should be conducted on the assumption that there's no God." And he answered his own question. He said, the sufficient answer to all this is, it cannot possibly be done. Elements of English composition, 1880s. God, morality, Scripture. The most popular civics book in our country throughout time. Washington's farewell address, and this one is combined with the first address at Bunker Hill. 63 references to God, prayer, and divine protection for America. So what has changed? It's very obvious, isn't it? The foundations of Judeo-Christian liberal arts are no longer taught in our educational institutions. And that is what our Constitution and our government and our society are based on. One of the results, we have a meltdown in America. The Intercollegiate Studies Institute, under the American Civic Literacy Program, put together a little test, 25 questions. They gave it to about 2,500 Americans, most of them high school or college educated. Simple test. Number 3 was, what are the 3 branches of government? Number 2 was, name one right or freedom under the First Amendment. Another one was, what is the subject of the Second Amendment? Almost no one could pass that test. 90% failed. Most of them couldn't recognize this building. Do you? Independence Hall. Do you realize that for centuries, this country was filled with homeschoolers? Virtually everyone was educated at home or in a school that their parents chose for them and monitored very closely. Even in 1900, as late as 1900, there were only 34 states with a compulsory attendance law. And most schools and parents still taught love of government, love of country, including those public or community schools. So where are we going? What happened? How did it get here? Well, here's an article that kind of illustrates this for me. Government schools today lean so far to the political correctness side that they're in danger of falling over. Earth Day, Kwanzaa, Transcendental Meditation, aberrant behavior, everything is politically correct. In other words, atheist, humanist, socialist. In fact, any religion that isn't biblical Christianity is banned. I call it the ABC religion, anything but Christianity. So now you can't even mention Bible, Christ, Christmas, Easter, or Easter egg. It's banned from the school systems in the Washington state school districts. These two basic and warring philosophies of child rearing and education both involve the assumed ownership of children. And here's kind of the first statement on that issue. Hillary Clinton back in the 90s, who told us that it takes a village to raise a child. That is a very socialist, Marxist viewpoint. In the 1990s and into this century, that statement became the new norm. Her statement's been embedded in our culture, in our schools, and particularly in our educational establishment. In this gradual frog in the water conditioning process, the Marxist-humanist model of parenting is becoming the norm. Statism, socialism, extreme nationalism, fascism, Nazi style, even extremists in environmentalism, Darwinism, these are all first cousins of the same worldviews, worshiping the world, the creation rather than the creator, or coming up with their own worship. Government is the primary and sole educator in this system, and it becomes ultimately the only educator, and that poses an extreme danger to mankind. Individuals and their belongings and their very lives are subservient to government. Government becomes the ultimate authority, and that danger is illustrated all throughout our history. Let me examine a few of these. Let me give you a few examples. Here's a statement. The way to crush the bourgeois is to grind them between the millstones of taxation and inflation. There are no morals in politics, only expedience. A scoundrel may be of use to us just because he's a scoundrel. It's true that liberty is precious, so it must be rationed. A lie told often enough becomes the truth. I love this one. The oppressed are allowed once every few years to decide which particular representatives of the oppressing class are to represent and repress them in Parliament. The best way to destroy the capitalist system is to debauch the currency. The press should not only be a collective propagandist, but an agitator and also a collective organizer of the masses. Our program necessarily includes the propaganda of atheism. Democracy is indispensable to socialism. One man with a gun can control 100 without one. Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted. And finally, give us the child for 8 years, and it will be a Bolshevik forever. Every single one of these is a direct quote of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Do you hear an echo from the halls of government and public schools today on many, many of those issues? The most successful and brutal of all Marxist totalitarians from 1917 to 1924, absolutely deadly to tens of millions of people. You know, in this parenting model, government agents and their authorities are the sole authorities over all children. If you're doubtful about that, you might want to have a little run-in with Child Protective Services sometime when you've done absolutely nothing wrong, which we did with my youngest daughter when she was just 2 or 3 years old in California. Also, if you're doubtful your public school indoctrination might be showing, have you observed the courts as they view children lately? Have you tried to impact institutional education within a public school or a government school lately? I have, nationwide. It's pretty much a closed shop, as anybody who's been opposing Common Core can quickly tell you. So in this world dedicated to the concept of the state as parent, we're not even partners. In Oak Harbor, Washington, 1997, there was a blended family, product of 2 divorces. They had a young son who was 13 and was going to church with them 3 times a week. The judge in that case, when the school called Child Protective Services, brought in the state and backed a battle against the parents for this 13-year-old in a public school, the state eventually ruled that 1 time a week was enough for any child to go to church. Pull the child out of the home for that reason and put them in foster care. 2000, Salt Lake City, Utah. David and Teresa Rodriguez, very neat, wonderful people, very interesting people. They came here on inner tubes from Cuba to escape Castro. They were living in Salt Lake City. They were ordered, because they have a retarded child and an autistic child, by the Utah State authorities to go get a test, a psychological profile on their child. They did. They went and found one that had done those tests on other children before, certified by the state. They turned in the test, and the state authorities refused to accept it. They wanted the child sent to their people that they named. Well, these folks have had their run-ins with government, so they left Arizona. They went to Utah, to Arizona from Utah. They left Utah, went to Arizona, thinking they were fleeing this kind of oppression. But on March 7th, 1998, a joint task force of Arizona and Utah law enforcement and Child Protective Services raided their Arizona home, took their 4 children, put them into foster care. 13-year-old daughter was raped twice before she escaped and disappeared. They've not seen her since, nor any of the other 3 children. You know, it's enough to make you cry when David Rodriguez will look you in the eye, which I have done, and say, you know, we escaped from Castro's Cuba to come here for freedom, only to have the American government steal our children. Isolated incidents? Not at all. Douglas Besharov at the National Center on Child Abuse estimated in 1998 there were 2,100,000 cases of invasion of family by government authority. He estimates today there are 24% more than that this year. Of those, the 2,100,000 then, he said 1,200,000 were, quote, in his words, utterly baseless. 640,000 posed no serious danger to the child, 160,000 posed no serious threat, and 8,000 involved some form of abuse in the opinion of Child Protective Services. Now, I'm not a believer in child abuse. I'm a believer in preventing child abuse, and there are ways of doing that. It's called morality. It's called a scriptural upbringing. It's the kind of parenting that I've been talking about. But this 2 million homes invaded by government in the name of protecting the children, I don't think is protection at all. Connecticut parent moved from Massachusetts to Connecticut to escape what he saw as these politically correct policies in the Massachusetts schools, only to find that his daughter in the Massachusetts school, this middle school daughter, was reading a book that was highly pornographic. And she was required to read it, and he was never notified.
That you put this book out with the notice. Why don't we read the notice that was put out?
Right, we asked him. Would anyone else like to speak?
Because I violated 2-minute rule.
And here he is being handcuffed and hauled to jail. He violated the 2-minute rule in the school board meeting and went to jail. The hierarchy in this system is very simple. Government. Family and God don't exist. They're blocked out. They're replaced with the masses and the schools.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
She is the leader of the Lean Forward group, a public school advocacy group under the umbrella of Barack Obama's Forward movement. She's carrying Hillary Clinton's torch. Collective notion, kids belong to communities, making better investments. My children are an investment for government. So who's done this? Well, let's get into the secret history of so-called public education. Remember, public education or government education is the only one that's allowed in totalitarian countries. And leadership of that involves control. If you study the 19th, 20th, and 21st century education in this country as I have, you'll find out that this book is a virtual model for the creation of the public schools in America. It was published in 1930. William Z. Foster published it. It was disappeared for many, many years. Other than in the bookshelves, I think of perhaps some NEA folks. And it was republished in 2006, surprisingly, by Microsoft Corp. Okay? Read about the NEA. If you don't know about the NEA, buy some good books on it. The NEA Socialist Network by Al Benson. He made a life work out of that research. Sally Reed's book, NEA, Propaganda Front for the Radical Left. Dennis Cuddy and his NEA, Grab for Power. Sam Blumenfeld's seminal work, NEA, Trojan Horse in American Education. It's been different among the ranks of teachers for a long time, different from the American public. If you look at the percentages here, you'll see as far back as 1980, this Connecticut Mutual Life Report showed educators and the general public way out of whack. It said homosexuality is immoral. 71% of the public agreed. Only 30% of educators in 1980 agreed with that. You're familiar with this face, John Dewey. We've all seen his name. We've seen the brass busts everywhere. He's the father of modern public and progressive education. His right-hand man is a guy named John Dunphy, and this is Dewey. Now, Dunphy basically was a ghostwriter and personal assistant to John Dewey. This is a brass bust of John Dewey from the administrative counter of my high school in Yuba City, California in 1970. It was there from 66 to 70. I would imagine it's still there today. Oh, by the way, the picture that flits by here, that's John Dunphy with his boyfriend, Truman Capote. They said this in an article in 1983. I'm convinced the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers that correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith. It goes on to say the classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and new, the rotting corpse of Christianity, together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith of humanism. That's John Dewey and John Dunphy. 1983 in the Humanist magazine. This is Charles F. Potter. This is another famous educator and a contemporary of John Dewey. Here's what he said in 1930. Education is thus a most powerful ally of humanism, and every American school is a school of humanism. What can a theistic Sunday schools meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children do to stem the tide of the 5-day program of humanistic teaching? This is a leading light of the public education movement in 1930. What do he and Dewey have in common besides that? Well, there's page 1, page 2, and page 3 of the Humanist Manifesto. You notice the highlights at the bottom? John Dewey was an author and signature of the Humanist Manifesto, the father of modern public education, as was Charles Francis Potter. So given the facts of public education, founding, and leadership, is this any mystery?
A Texas family has a second grader that they say was not allowed to read her Bible during private reading time in class.
This fifth grader pulled out chosen material for free reading time.
Then she said, "Giovanni, what book is that?"
That's when he says the teacher asked him twice to put the Bible on her desk, and he refused.
And she told me to get my dad on the phone.
Here's the voicemail she left.
Good morning, Mr. Rubio, Mrs. Thomas. Giovanni called you because I asked him to. I noticed that he has a book, a religious book, in the classroom. He's not permitted to read those books in my classroom. He said, if I told him to put it away, you said not to do that. So please give me a call. I need to have some understanding on direction to him about the book he's reading as opposed to the curriculum for public school. Mrs. F. Thomas, thank you and have a wonderful day.
So who are the experts that are cited now? We know it was the Bible from our earlier section. The 5 most cited experts or sources for education today from educational experts across the board are UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNICEF, related organization, the Department of Education, college professors, and university administrators. I will remind you that UNICEF's motto is "Every child is our child." This is another darling of that set, the UN folks, the folks at the NEA, etc., and the public school systems. A common UN model today for young ladies is Margaret Sanger, lauded in public schools and the UN and Planned Parenthood as a woman of valor. Planned Parenthood's audacious founder had some interesting things to say about race, about birth control, and abortion. An outspoken eugenicist, she spoke frequently to Nazi crowds and Ku Klux Klan gatherings. And here's one of her statements. The most merciful thing that the large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. That's a hero for you young ladies. Why is this happening? We're paying for it in spades. The leftist community has globalist ties between our government and the education establishment. They're plentiful. Here's one of the popular manuals put out by the U.S. Department of Education last year. It's titled "Succeeding Globally Through International Education and Engagement, the U.S. Department of Education International Strategy." Did you know your government had an international strategy for which you're paying for education? There's the book. Here's another book. This is a 150-page document about how the government plans to engage in promoting grit, tenacity, and perseverance, survival factors for the 21st century. I thought that was a parental prerogative. And here's some of the tools they plan to ferret out the politically incorrect folks among those students. Here is the data sharing, data mining plan for that government agency. Here are some of the books that are being used. We ran across this. Dr. Pester ran across this here in Wisconsin, when the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel attacked him and said this book didn't really exist, it wasn't really being used, they weren't aware of it being used in Milwaukee schools. Went down to the Milwaukee Library, there's a copy on the shelf, and if you look at the panel on the right, if you look closely, you can see that copy was donated to the Milwaukee Public Library by none other than the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. We know leftists are cliche in schools, particularly in colleges, but the nature of these people will shock you. Bill Ayers, Weather Underground leader, cop killer, federal building bomber, self-proclaimed communist, and retired head of a department at Chicago's University of Illinois campus. He was the featured keynote speaker at this last February's Association of Teacher Educators in Atlanta. He was the keynote speaker to the teachers who teach the teachers who end up in your public schools. There's his wanted poster from the FBI. This is Larry Grathwohl. He's an undercover witness to Bill Ayers' philosophy in the 60s and 70s.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. Now, I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
You might remember Bill Ayer's name. President Obama indicated that was the living room in which his presidential campaign began. By the way, do you know where Bill Ayers went in 2005? He went to Venezuela. Venezuela was his home for a year while he constructed the, quote, social justice educational system there for Hugo Chavez. So how's it happening? You're getting a flavor of that. But here's President Barack Obama, we just talked about, who funneled $3.35 billion of your tax money through the Race to the Top program in efforts to force Common Core through bribery on all the states in the nation. 46 of them accepted those funds, sight unseen. And when Texas refused, the Department of Public Instruction in Texas forced in something through the back door that they called a replacement curriculum, called the C-scope curriculum. It was so bad when the legislature and the citizens and the teachers found out about it, they threw it out. They passed legislation to force it out of the school system and purge it from the school system. By the way, that was also written by Bill Ayers. It's not new. They were teaching Ho Chi Minh and Mao Zedong in public school classrooms in 1968. In 1970, Washington State Supervisor of Schools told teachers nationwide, we should resist teaching the Constitution in terms of what the separate clauses mean, and recommended a book called Teaching as a Subversive Activity as a guide for their Constitution Day activity. Robert Maynard Hutchins, Chancellor of the University of Chicago, has something in common with this gentleman, Albert Shanker. Albert Shanker was head of the American Federation of Teachers from 1974 to 1997. In this slide, he's shown as the head of the new EI, Education International, which Bill Gates calls the New World School Board. Here's Albert Shanker there. And Albert Shanker just happens to have been one of the foundational members of the Young People's Socialist League. By the way, if you need a copy of Rules for Radicals, you can go to the NEA Most Recommended list and buy it from their website. And here's a quote from the NEA website. Note the date at the bottom as I read this. In the struggle to establish an adequate world government, the teacher has many parts to play. He must begin with his own attitude and knowledge and purpose. He can do much to prepare the hearts and minds of children for global understanding and cooperation. At the very top of all the agencies which will assure the coming of world government must stand the school, the teacher, and the organized profession. January 1946. Obamacare links to public education. Obamacare links to the CCSS, or Common Core State Standards. And the curriculum itself is horrid. This is a sample of Common Core brainwashing. A president's job is not easy, is one answer. He makes sure the country's laws are fair. I thought there was a Congress and a court out there for that. Government officials' commands must be obeyed by all. And number 6 is right out of the manifesto, an individual's wants are less important than the nation's well-being. Here is, right in our own state, the new high school in Richland Center, Wisconsin. Here's the promotional pamphlet for it. And you can see in this slide, the reason they need a new school, they say, in line 2, is by its very nature, this new world order must include education and will become the focal point. Professor I even hate to call him that. Otis Madison told his students at Santa Barbara just 2 weeks ago that if they were, quote, Ted Cruz supporting teabaggers to get the blank out of his classroom before he sent them home to their mother in a body bag, end quote. Monday night last week, a satanic mass was held at Harvard University, the former seminary school right next door to Princeton, the one that I quoted that theologian from earlier. They've rewritten the Bill of Rights. They've rewritten the First and Second Amendments in these assignments. And here's an assignment that was telling children in middle school to apologize for the Nazis and support the idea that Jews are evil. That was the writing assignment in the English class. But it's all local, right? We've all heard that. Talk to the teachers, talk to the administrators. It all came up from the bottom up. It's all teacher funded and teacher organized, and it all came from our states and our governors, right? This is the Common Core Works organization. This is the promotional organization. This is their slideshow. Slide number 4 is where? Shanghai. The slide above it is India. And again, Paris, Shanghai. We're naturalizing and normalizing our national education with international education in communist countries and Middle Eastern countries. The NEA is supporting that. All of these organizations are the shadow organizations that helped this man put together Common Core at a cost of over $200 million directly and $200 million in promotion. We recently got an article on a study that was done of the 200 some odd pro-Common Core organizations in the country. 196 of them received all or most of their funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But it's only because Common Core is so good that we need it, right? That's what we keep hearing from the teachers. And not so much from the teachers, but from the administrators and from the Department of Public Instruction. But New York teachers who've had it the longest are rejecting it, asking them to withdraw. Chicago teachers, not exactly a bastion of conservatism, are rejecting Common Core. Even the NEA admits Common Core has been, quote unquote, botched. Why do we have Common Core? Because whoever has the youth has the future. Here's a last statement from Lenin. Only by radically remolding the teaching organization and training of the youth shall we be able to ensure that the efforts of the younger generation will result in the creation of a society that will be unlike the old society, i.e. the creation of a communist society. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, 3rd All-Russia Congress of the Russian Young Communist League, October 1920. I submit to you since the 1880s, the socialist humanist movement in this country has worked to create, influence, and control our public school system. Not every teacher in every classroom is in a smoke-filled room conspiring to capture your children for Marxism. There are many good people out there still trying to work within the system. There are many good people out there that are in administration and teachers and other people who are trying to work with students for the right reasons. But I suspect many of them are like me, recovering public school students who may not even know what they do or how it's happening. It's taken 100 years to change our life and how we implement our government and our education, but these folks are near their goal. So the real final question here is, what can we do? What can you and I do? I'm going to use Abraham Lincoln here, because I think what he said was very accurate. He said the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. How true. You and I must begin the work of being the influence to change the philosophy of the schoolroom in this generation, to change the government in the next. We can influence what happens in our local schools, individually, corporately. Here's a group in Marshfield, Wisconsin on May 14th. They came out to hear Dr. Pesta talk about Common Core, and they tell us there's no following. It's just a few hotheads and weirdos. Looks like a pretty good crowd to me. Private and home education are excellent solutions. Ultimately, parents, you are going to have to take responsibility for your children, for your grandchildren, for your great-grandchildren, and begin to engineer the choosing of who will teach them, what they will be taught. And I believe ultimately Common Core, The teachers' unions and many of our public schools, and certainly a lot of the administrations who have been filtered down from the same influence, must be dismantled over time and replaced with education controlled by the parents who are responsible, who are stewards for their children. You know, this is my little crew here, and the picture you just saw, my grandkids, my kids, they're very precious to me. We've invested a lot of time and effort and energy and money into home educating our children. I know, we're all paying taxes for those public schools too, so have I, for 29 years. But I'm not willing to sacrifice my children to them. It's time we get up. It's time we begin to work. It's time we begin to educate others as to what's happening to our education system. The fact that it isn't by accident, and that it is a deadly malady that will eventually overwhelm us governmentally, economically, and in many other ways. You've seen the evidence today. If I haven't been clear, please come up and ask me a question when we're done. But are you willing now to get up and do something to help educate others, to help some recovering public school student to gain a little bit more knowledge and get involved in this battle? I certainly hope so. I certainly hope that you don't go back to sleep when we're done here. And I thank you very much for coming and listening to me so patiently.